The powers that be in college football have Dave Aranda and Joey McGuire on a collision course for the 2025 Big 12 championship game. Let's get locked on Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello there, Bears fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by FanDuel. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and The Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. I appreciate you guys making it your first listen today and every day, and sometimes your second listen as we bring you the afternoon edition. Really appreciate that. You guys have been awesome. Today on Locked On Baylor, what we're going to look at is this factor of 2025 is what's going to get Baylor to the Big 12 championship game. And it could get our old friends at Texas Tech there too. Plus, a lot of Kansas State fans rooting for Will Howard the other night, national championship game, and some that weren't exactly in that same boat. How would we handle that if it came down to one of our old guys playing for a national championship? We'll go through that exercise on Locked On Baylor. Starting first with the 2025 football season outlook, I've said it on here many times. I'm not going to stop saying it. I think Baylor is absolutely one of probably 3 or 4 teams that we see preseason that could be in the Big 12 championship game this year. Obviously, we know with this conference, they can always throw you for a loop. Arizona State was picked 16th going into this year. You never know. And Oklahoma State was picked to potentially go to the playoff, and they don't win a conference game. You definitely never know before anyone says that. But we follow this team and this league every day. I do it twice a day, make a show. So I like to think, I follow this league plenty, and I see the traits of those teams that typically win this conference. And I think Baylor's one of the couple of teams that has those, that has the returning starters, that has the important positions in place. And I like their coaching staff, if we're being totally honest. And so I think Baylor's one of those teams. Texas Tech, always the dark horse in the Big 12, right? Always. This is the year that Joey puts it together. And every year it tops out at about 8-4. This year, 8-5, same record as Baylor. And Baylor obviously won the head-to-head matchup pretty convincingly. But now Tech brings in arguably the best recruiting class in America this year. Baylor's filled in some of their holes in the transfer portal. They've got the quarterback coming back, the running back coming back, this all-powerful offense. But none of that matters when it comes to why they're going to be in the Big 12 championship game. It helps, but it's not what really matters. What really matters is this cold, hard fact. When you look at the Big 12 2025 schedule based on their opponent's 2024 winning percentage. This is from Cody Nagel of 247, by the way. Let's take out the FCS teams. Don't bother with the FCS teams. We're talking about FBS teams and their winning percentage. Baylor has the 15th toughest schedule in the Big 12, which I don't know if you guys know this. That's not great. It's great for us, but that's second to last in the conference. There's 16 teams in the conference, and theirs is 15th, the 507 win percentage by their opponents last year. Sitting there in 16th place, everyone's dark horse all the time, Texas Tech Red Raiders. Easiest schedule in the Big 12, and in fact, by far the easiest schedule in the Big 12. Because most of these, we're talking about just a couple percentage points. Baylor's at 15th, 507 win percentage by their opponents last year. Kansas is just ahead of them at 511. So it's not that much of a difference. But at the top, TCU is ahead by 36 percentage points over number 2, the toughest schedule in the conference. And Tech is 47 points below in terms of that win percentage. And you look at the schedules and you say, boy, that does make a lot of sense. That does make a lot of sense. And that's not even taking into account the time of year that you're playing them, whether those games are home or away. It doesn't take any of that into account. And if you're looking at the non-conference schedule, Baylor's is much better than Tech's. Tech goes UAPB, Kent State, Oregon State to open up their schedule. Obviously, all three at home. I guess they did play a Pac-2 school on the road last year. But Baylor and their non-con starts with Auburn and then at SMU, a playoff team. But when you look through Baylor's schedule, it's pretty favorable, not just by that win percentage number, but here's the toughest games on the schedule for me. Arizona State, playoff team last year, Big 12 champs. I'm talking the conference schedule, obviously. Toughest Big 12 games, Arizona State, Kansas State. I like Kansas State again. I'm going to fall for it again. I think those are your two toughest conference games. They're both at home. Utah, excellent coach. Maybe they turn this thing around. Maybe it is Isaac Wilson is the guy, and they've got some of the defensive places and pieces still in place. That game's at home too. UCF, RJ Harvey can't believe how they went 4-8. New head coach. They love Scott Frost down there. That game's at home too. Cincinnati, probably the easiest conference game on your schedule. It's on the road. Bummer. TCU, that's on the road. That's a tough one, right? That's probably ends up being your toughest conference game. Because I think TCU is going to be a solid team, and that's a place where you obviously struggle. You struggle to beat TCU anywhere the last decade, and you put that one on the road. That's kind of difficult. But if I'm looking at that, I'm like, hey, like two toughest opponents are both at home, and then the next one is a rivalry game. Like, you can lose a game or two in this conference and still get there. I mean, I think we saw that on full display this past year. And for Tech, they've got a couple ones on the road. I talk about the two toughest opponents for Baylor. Both those games are on the road for Tech, at Arizona State, at Kansas State. BYU, they've got it home. That's a big advantage. They've got a big advantage at home. They've also got to go to West Virginia. They've got to go to Utah. They've got to go to Big Bad Houston. But they get Oklahoma State at home, BYU at home, Kansas at home, UCF at home, for what that matters. If I say it for Baylor, I got to say it for Tech. But with these two teams and the uncertainty of this league, they come in with the easiest schedules in the conference. And how often do we say this about Baylor? We said about Baylor in 2023 of it matters to us, no matter how good the team is, whom they're playing and where they're playing. Dave Aranda has not shown a great record of winning on the road in his time at Baylor. It got better towards the back half of this last season, obviously, with wins at Tech, win at West Virginia for the first time ever, a win at Houston, and it was a road game. But overall, in his tenure at Baylor, doesn't win well on the road. Now here's your two toughest opponents in terms of the conference schedule. They're both at home. And Auburn, that's a big name brand coming in here. That's at home. So it's up to you to win those home games. And if you do, Baylor's going to be there for the Big 12 championship. Easy schedule, some favorable home games. Tech, in terms of the winning percentage, facing a pretty easy schedule. A lot of that probably has to do with their first three games as well. But maybe they can spearhead some momentum and we can see a butt bowl Big 12 championship back in Arlington, where it was for so long and where Baylor won the lion's share of those games. But what an intriguing matchup that would be. Joey McGuire, Dave Aranda, this Baylor Tech thing that's been going back and forth the last couple of years. Hey, whoever wears the white uniforms at Arlington, that's probably going to be the team that wins. The road team, so to speak, is going to win that game the way that's gone the last couple of years. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Is this a real possibility? Do we need to look past just the fact that they have an easy schedule? And who do you think is going to be in the Big 12 championship game? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. It helps out a ton. And you can find us wherever you find your podcasts, because Locked On Baylor keeps rolling on in the evening edition. Let's take a look at how some Big 12 fans handled this national championship and what we would do as Baylor fans. That's coming up next on Locked On Baylor. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. All right, we've got the playoffs here, and the way to make everything more interesting, specifically in the NFL, is through FanDuel. I mean, let's not kid ourselves here. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. When you win that first bet, that's $300 to keep the action going. Just visit FanDuel.com, to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So I found this interesting Monday night. Obviously Ohio State wins the national championship. Everyone's so happy for Will Howard. Seems like, pretty nice guy and everything. And I was intrigued by how Kansas State fans would handle this. Because, last year with J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix, Indiana fans were like, just another chapter in our, miserable history. Obviously, these guys were too good for Indiana. Indiana obviously will never be in that spot. And then you flash forward a year and their team's in the playoff. But Kansas State fans, they put a lot into Avery Johnson. And I don't want to say they forced Will Howard out the door. From what I saw, it looked like Will Howard was ready to go. And this whole season, I was talking about how OU fans would handle it if Dylan Gabriel won the national championship, a guy that they did force out the door, really, because they wanted to get their guy in, Jackson Arnold. And a year later, they go 6-7. He's in the portal, and Dylan Gabriel crashes out in the first playoff game. But Kansas State's not that far off. I don't know if they forced their guy out in Will Howard, but they had their next guy ready to go. That might have been a hush-hush. Hey, we're going with Avery here. We want it to be Avery's team. And Kansas State kind of underperforms this year. I really thought they would be in that Big 12 championship game. I really liked the team they had coming out of this, maybe just as much as I liked Oklahoma State and Utah. And they don't have a terrible year, but they're sitting there licking their wounds, and their quarterback from last year is winning the national championship on one of the great teams of the 21st century, I think you'd have to say. A lot of the Kansas State fans online that I saw were happy for Will Howard and rooting for him. But there was a soft underbelly of people that hated to see it, didn't want to see it, because he's not their guy anymore. And it allowed for a ton of trolling opportunities for other Big 12 fans to, point at the record that that Kansas State had with Will Howard and the things that they weren't able to quite accomplish. They did, of course, win the Big 12 and go to the Sugar Bowl in 2022. But it got my mind thinking, like, what if that was one of our guys up there? Of course, my first thought was, what if Will Howard had accepted the $6 million offer to come play for Baylor? But mostly I was thinking, what if it was one of our guys? What if it was, by the way, Baylor has no shortage of active college football quarterbacks out there that used to play for them. What if it was Kyron Drones? What if it was Blake Shapen? What if it was Gary Bohannon that's up there celebrating the national championship? How would Baylor fans respond to that? It's a little bit different from the conundrum, if you can call it that we had 2 years ago of TCU being in the national championship, because I think that split some of the Baylor fan base, to say, most of us, like me, felt like we were saying, no, never TCU at any point. We don't want TCU to win the national championship. By no means do we want that. But there was, I think, a significant amount of the Baylor fan base that was saying this is good for college football. It's good for the Big 12. It's good for schools like Baylor that are, again, very much like TCU, athletic programs that are very, very similar. And that if TCU can do it, then Baylor can do it. And it became this kind of debate amongst Baylor fans as to whether you'd be even rooting for TCU or not. So how would we feel if it was Blake Shapen up there accepting the national championship trophy and going to a bigger program because they felt they couldn't succeed at your program, and then proving that partially correct, at least temporarily correct? It would hurt, man. I think it would hurt. That said, it'd be tough for me to be like, screw Blake Shapen. Hate that. In fact, if you look at it, their careers at their Big 12 teams are quite similar. Will Howard wins the Big 12 championship with Kansas State. He's the quarterback in the Big 12 championship game. And while it was Gary's team in 2021, Blake was the guy out there balling out in the conference championship when Gary was hurt. And he had a great game. He was the MVP of the game. Before he got hurt in that game, he was terrific. Was setting stadium records for consecutive completions. And so if the Kansas State fans can be happy for Will Howard, I think Baylor fans would be happy for Blake Shapen. But it would once again, at least temporarily, prove that a quarterback needs to go somewhere else to win big rather than at Baylor. And here with this 12-team playoff, I don't think that's a good enough excuse anymore. I think Sawyer Robertson and or Walker White can get Baylor to the promised land. And by that, I mean in a 14 playoff or in the old BCS structure, it was nearly impossible for Baylor to win a national championship. With a 12-team playoff, it's as possible as ever. And for you Baylor fans trying to do that Blake Shapen scenario in your head still, I got good news for you. Mississippi State ain't going to be there. You don't have to worry about that. Baylor's got a better chance at winning the national championship in the 12-team playoff than Mississippi State does. And this current right now, like I wouldn't worry about it, guys. I wouldn't worry about it. But maybe you have to ask the Mississippi State fans if they worry about seeing Sawyer Robertson on the stage next year. Maybe that's the question. But anyway, that got my brain going big time. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. If I'm being stupid about this, if it's even worth talking about, or how you would feel. Like, let's just put you in the shoes. How would you feel if it was your former quarterback up there accepting the national championship trophy for a different team? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to like the video. That helps out the channel a ton. Subscribing helps even more. And if you want to continue to help this channel, you can find us wherever you find your podcasts as well. You don't even have to watch us on YouTube. That's where you'll find us every morning, 7 a.m. on YouTube, every evening, 5 p.m. on YouTube, and a little bit earlier for the podcast as well. But don't tell anybody. So again, get involved. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. We will have a Wicker Wednesday tomorrow. We're going to be looking at that Kansas State game and why that's a must win for Baylor. And maybe we'll talk a little Will Howard and how that deal could have changed everything for the Baylor Bears. Anyway, we'll see you then on your favorite show, Locked On Baylor.